The dusty little town sat quietly between two long roads, where the wind carried the sound of horses and the creak of old wooden doors. People here knew each other by name, and secrets never stayed hidden for long. At the center of the town stood the sheriff's house, a big white building with wide porches and a tall fence. It showed power, just like the man who lived there. The sheriff was a wealthy man, proud of his land, his name, and the way people stepped aside when he walked through the street. The sheriff had only one child, a daughter named Amelia. Years earlier, she had been in an accident that left her unable to walk. Since then, she spent most of her days inside the house, looking out through the windows at the world she could no longer join. She was gentle and kind, but her father saw her as something broken, something that did not fit into his proud world. He loved power more than he loved anything else, and he felt her weakness was a shameful mark on his name. Down the road, far from the big houses, lived a quiet rancher named Caleb. He owned a small piece of land where he raised cattle and worked from dawn to sunset. He was not a rich man, but everyone in town respected him. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. He was honest, fair, and had a calm strength that others admired. While the sheriff spent his time showing power, Caleb spent his building it slowly, day by day, through hard work. The sheriff had always looked down on Caleb. He saw him as just a simple rancher who would never amount to anything great. But deep down, the sheriff also envied Caleb's quiet strength, the kind that didn't need a big house or piles of money. Over time, he grew a strange dislike for him, though Caleb had never done him any harm. One warm afternoon, the sheriff sat on his porch with a few wealthy friends, laughing loudly as they drank sweet tea. The conversation turned to marriage and power. One of them joked about how some men married only for land or to rise in status. The sheriff, with a cruel smile, made a joke of his own. "Maybe I should give my daughter to Caleb," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see how a poor rancher handles a wife who can't walk." His friends laughed with him, not out of kindness, but because no one dared to do otherwise. The next morning, the sheriff rode to Caleb's ranch with a few men. Dust followed them as their horses stopped in front of the small wooden house. Caleb came out, wiping his hands on a cloth after fixing a fence. He stood tall and steady. The sheriff stepped down from his horse with that same proud grin on his face. "Caleb," he said loudly, "I have an offer for you. I'll give you my daughter Amelia to marry. You'll have the honor of being tied to my family name." His voice was sharp, but his eyes were filled with mockery. He expected Caleb to refuse. He wanted to make a show of power, to humiliate him in front of everyone who would hear this story later. But Caleb didn't laugh. He didn't frown either. He looked at the sheriff with calm eyes, the same way he looked at storms, quiet but unshaken. "If Amelia agrees," Caleb said simply, "then I will marry her." For a second, the sheriff thought he had heard wrong. His friends stared in surprise. This was not the reaction they had expected. The sheriff laughed to cover his shock. "You don't even know what you're saying. My daughter is paralyzed. She's no ranch wife. She can't work in the fields. She can't give you what you want." Caleb's answer was steady. "I'm not marrying a worker," he said softly. "I'm marrying a person." The sheriff didn't care what Caleb truly meant. He only saw it as a game. He went home, told Amelia about his plan, and said the rancher had agreed. Amelia sat still, her hands tightening on the wooden arms of her chair. Her heart beat fast. She had lived under her father's control for so long that her life felt like a small room with no doors. This marriage was not her choice, but something deep inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was a door opening. Amelia had seen Caleb before from afar. He was quiet but not cold. When others in town walked past her without looking, Caleb had always nodded politely. He had never treated her like she was invisible. So when her father announced his cruel joke, Amelia agreed. It wasn't because she dreamed of love or escape. It was because she hoped for a chance to live a life of her own, even if it was different from what others imagined. The wedding day was simple. The sheriff didn't celebrate it like a proud father would. To him, this was just entertainment, a story to laugh at later. But Caleb stood beside Amelia, not laughing, not showing pity. He spoke his vows with a quiet strength that made Amelia's heart ache in a way she had never felt before. As they rode to the ranch after the ceremony, Amelia looked at the wide fields stretching toward the horizon. The air smelled of earth and hay, and the wind touched her face gently. It was so different from the heavy silence of her father's house. Caleb helped her down from the carriage carefully, not like someone helping a fragile object, but like someone helping a partner. He had built a wooden ramp leading to the house, something he had worked on quietly after agreeing to the marriage. Amelia noticed it and felt something warm rise in her chest. No one had ever prepared anything for her comfort before. The first days on the ranch were quiet. Caleb worked outside and Amelia watched from the porch. At night he would sit with her, not talking much but listening whenever she spoke. She began to notice the small things he did. How he fixed things without complaint. How he treated the animals gently. How he never once looked at her with pity. That alone made her feel like a person again, not just someone trapped in a chair. In town, people whispered. Some said Caleb was foolish. Others said the sheriff had finally found a way to humiliate him. But Caleb didn't care about their words. He cared about building a home where both of them could live in peace. Amelia still carried fear inside her. She had spent so many years believing she was a burden that it was hard to imagine being anything else. Sometimes late at night she would cry quietly, afraid that Caleb would regret marrying her. But every morning he greeted her with the same steady calm, like the sun rising, never rushing, never judging. Little by little, something began to change inside her. She stopped feeling like a piece of her father's power and started feeling like her own person. She asked Caleb if she could help with the ranch, not with hard labor but with planning and keeping track of things. He agreed without hesitation. He built a small desk near the window where she could write down records and manage supplies. For the first time in years, Amelia felt needed, not as a burden but as someone who could help build something real. Meanwhile, the sheriff waited for the moment when Caleb would come back defeated, tired of taking care of his daughter. But that day never came. Caleb didn't treat Amelia like a burden. He treated her like a partner. And in a quiet, steady way, their bond began to grow stronger than anyone expected. The town that once laughed at the joke marriage began to watch closely. Something unusual was happening on that little ranch, something that no one could mock. Amelia, the girl who had spent years hidden behind her father's power, was starting to find her voice. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a story that would turn a cruel joke into something powerful. A story that would change how people saw her forever. The morning sun rose gently over the wide ranch fields. The golden light touched the wooden fences, the green grass, and the strong horses moving slowly near the barn. Amelia sat near the window, watching everything with calm eyes. She had been living on the ranch for several months now. At first it felt strange and unfamiliar, but slowly this place had started to feel like home. It was quiet, peaceful, and different from the heavy, cold house of her father. Here she was not a shadow. She was part of something real. Caleb was already outside, working with the cattle. He woke up early every day, just as he always had. But now he was not alone. Amelia had become part of his daily life in her own way. She couldn't work in the fields, but she was no longer sitting silently by the window. She had started to help with the ranch in the way she could, managing supplies, keeping accounts, and talking to the people who came to trade. Her soft voice and sharp mind surprised everyone. She could remember details that others forgot, and she could make fair deals without raising her tone. In the beginning, the workers didn't know what to think. They had heard the whispers from town. They thought Amelia was weak, someone to be taken care of. But day by day, she proved them wrong. She learned about the cattle, how to recognize good feed, and how to keep records clean and simple. She asked questions and listened carefully to every answer. Her presence slowly changed the way the ranch worked. Caleb watched all this quietly. He didn't give her instructions or treat her like someone who needed saving. He let her find her own way. He had always believed that strength didn't always come from the hands. Sometimes it came from the heart and the mind, and Amelia had both. One day a big storm hit the town. The wind roared like a wild animal and heavy rain turned the road into thick mud. Some of the cattle broke the fence and scattered. Caleb and the workers rushed to bring them back. Amelia couldn't go out there to help, but she did something else. She took a map of the land, marked the usual paths the cattle followed, and told the men where to search. Her clear instructions helped them find the animals faster than they ever had before. When the storm passed, everyone at the ranch looked at her with new eyes. She was no longer the sheriff's paralyzed daughter. She was Amelia, the woman who saved the ranch during the storm. From that day forward, she became part of every decision. She worked side by side with Caleb, not in the field, but in the mind and heart of the ranch. Meanwhile, in town, people began to talk differently. At first, they had laughed at Caleb for marrying Amelia, but now they saw how strong the ranch had become under their partnership. Their cattle were healthy, their trade fair, and their reputation growing. More people came to them for business, and slowly the whispers turned into quiet respect. The sheriff, however, did not like what he saw. He had expected the marriage to become a story of failure, something to make Caleb look weak. But instead, Caleb and Amelia had built something powerful and real. It bothered him to see his daughter shine in a place he had once mocked. One afternoon, the sheriff rode up to the ranch with 2 of his men. His expensive boots were dusty from the long ride. He stopped near the porch, expecting the same silence he once saw in his daughter's eyes. But this time, Amelia rolled out to meet him herself. Her eyes were steady, her voice calm. She didn't look like someone waiting to be spoken for. She looked like someone standing on her own ground. "I see the ranch is doing well," the sheriff said with a forced smile. "Yes," Amelia replied softly. "Better than anyone expected." He shifted in his saddle. He wanted to control the conversation, but Amelia wasn't the same woman she had been when he forced her into this marriage. "If you ever want to come home," he said slowly, "my doors are open." "You don't belong here, Amelia. You belong with your family." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm home," she answered. The simple words hit him harder than any argument could. Caleb came out of the barn at that moment, wiping his hands. He nodded politely at the sheriff, but didn't speak. He didn't have to. Amelia's voice was enough. The sheriff left with a stiff expression. He had lost the control he once had over her. As the months passed, Amelia's influence on the ranch grew stronger. She introduced new ways of trading with nearby towns. She set up a small storage room to keep track of supplies more carefully. With Caleb's support, she even started a small school near the ranch for the workers' children, teaching them to read and write in the evenings. Her wheelchair never stopped her from dreaming bigger. She used it to move around the house and ranch with confidence. The workers respected her deeply now. They saw how much she cared for the ranch and for them. Caleb, too, changed in quiet ways. Before Amelia came into his life, he worked hard but spoke little. He lived for the ranch and nothing else. But now, his evenings were filled with conversations, laughter, and shared plans for the future. Amelia brought warmth into the house, a warmth he didn't know he was missing. There was a night when the two of them sat on the porch watching the stars. The sky was clear and the air smelled like fresh hay. Amelia turned to Caleb and said, "Do you know what the best thing about this place is?" Caleb shook his head with a small smile. "It's that here," she said softly. "I feel like myself. Not my father's daughter. Not someone to be pitied. Just Amelia." Caleb didn't say anything grand. He just looked at her with the same quiet strength he had shown since the first day. But in that silence, she felt safe, seen, and valued. Soon, traders from far towns started visiting their ranch because they trusted Amelia's fair way of doing business. She was smart with numbers, kind with people, and firm when needed. Caleb worked the fields and Amelia managed the deals. Together, they turned a small ranch into something strong and respected. The people who once whispered now told her story with admiration. She didn't let her weakness define her, they said. She turned it into her strength. The sheriff, sitting alone in his big house, heard these words too. He had once tried to use her as a tool to humiliate someone else. But now the very thing he laughed at had become something powerful. His daughter had grown into a woman of courage, far from his shadow. One day the town decided to hold a fair, something they hadn't done in years. Caleb and Amelia brought their cattle to show. Everyone gathered in the town square. Amelia sat proudly beside Caleb as people came to greet them. Children from the small school she started ran up to her, showing her the words they had learned to write. The sheriff stood in the crowd watching. For the first time, he didn't see a fragile daughter in a wheelchair. He saw a leader, someone who had built her own path. As the fair ended, an old woman came up to Amelia and said, "Your father gave you away as a joke, but you turned it into something beautiful." Amelia smiled gently. "Sometimes," she said, "what others see as weakness can become your greatest strength." That night, as the ranch lights glowed softly, Caleb and Amelia sat outside again, side by side. The journey had not been easy. There were days of fear, doubt, and pain, but they had faced everything together. Caleb had seen her strength when no one else did, and Amelia had brought light into a quiet rancher's world. The wind moved softly across the fields. The horses slept quietly in the barn. The stars watched silently as two people who had once been part of someone's cruel joke now built something true and lasting. Amelia had not only found her place in the world, she had created it with her own hands and her unshakable spirit. And that, more than anything, was her true victory.